All right, my people, let's lock in. Midterms. Folks treat them like some off-year friendly match, but they're actually power inflection points. Every 2 years, the whole House and about a third of the Senate go back to the voters, and that can flip a president from commander-in-chief to negotiator-in-chief overnight.
Yeah, and historically, the president's party usually loses seats in those fights. Not always, there are exceptions, but the pattern's pretty consistent. Voters use midterms like a performance review when there's pain, economic, social, security. If people feel ignored or let down, they use that ballot to send a message.
Exactly. And because the margins in Congress are razor thin right now, a handful of districts in places like Pennsylvania or Arizona can decide whether a second Trump term, if he's back in that chair, has a green light or gets tied up in red tape. That's not theory, that's math.
From a military planning lens, midterms are like a mid-campaign reset. You're not swapping out the theater commander, but you are changing a lot of staff officers and key billets. New committee chairs, new appropriations priorities. That shifts what's realistic for the next 2 years. Budgets, authorizations, and the political appetite for risk overseas.
And look, I come at this from a national sovereignty angle. If Trump gets a second term, his stated agenda is pretty clear. Tougher border posture, more America first on trade and foreign policy, shakeup of the federal bureaucracy. With a friendly Congress, that's full throttle. With a hostile one, that's constant friction. Lawsuits, hearings, delays.
All of that is happening in a pretty volatile environment. You've got high polarization at home, families split over politics, online echo chambers, and then a world picture that's not exactly calm. Russia, China, Middle East tensions, cyber operations, gray zone activity. Allies and adversaries both watch U.S. midterms to gauge stability and resolve.
They read our drama like an intel brief. Is America steady or swinging like a pendulum every 2 years? That answer affects whether friends trust our promises and whether enemies think they can wait us out. So midterms are not just about who chairs some committee. They shape U.S. strategic posture.
To keep this from turning into just vibes and shouting, we're going to use 2 basic analytic tools. First one is PESTEL: political, economic, social, technological, environmental, and legal. That's basically your terrain map, how power, money, culture, tech, climate, and law are arranged depending on who wins.
Second one is SWOT: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. Business schools love it. Security planners use versions of it. We're going to apply it to 2 broad outcomes: Democrats doing well in the midterms versus Republicans holding or expanding control under a possible Trump second term.
Baseline picture before we branch the scenarios. Very narrow majorities in Congress. Extremely high polarization. Trump signaling a pretty aggressive second-term agenda if he returns, and a world that's testing U.S. attention and bandwidth in multiple theaters at once.
On top of that, real lives on the line at home. Workers, small business owners, veterans dealing with benefits, folks worried about crime or the border, and communities that feel over-policed or underprotected. For them, this isn't a game. It's whether government helps or just harasses.
So here's the plan. Chapter 2, we'll run the PESTEL scenarios. What shifts politically, economically, socially, and so on if Democrats control one or both chambers versus Republicans holding the hill with Trump in the White House. Then Chapter 3, we'll flip to SWOT and map the strengths and vulnerabilities each outcome creates.
Same world, different command structure. 2 possible midterm outcomes. 2 very different operating environments for American power. All right, Sentinel, let's step off into those scenarios. Let's start with the P in PESTEL, political. Scenario 1. Democrats take the House, maybe the Senate, with Trump back in the Oval. What does that battlefield look like?
You'd likely see aggressive oversight. Think hearings, subpoenas, investigations into things like corruption allegations, human rights implications of border and policing policies, and how protests are handled. That kind of oversight can slow or reshape how executive power gets used, even if it can't fully block it.
And from where I sit, that's a hostile Congress. You'd get gridlock on big Trump priorities, major immigration overhauls, big deregulation pushes, some spending cuts. He'd still have executive orders, but Democrats could use the power of the purse and slow roll tactics to box him in on a lot of fronts, including things like voting rules and DEI programs.
Flip it. Scenario 2. Republicans hold or expand both chambers with Trump in the White House. Then you've got consolidated executive legislative power. Nominations move faster, committees are friendlier, and a lot of the checks on appointments and policy experiments are weaker.
That's unity of command, man. In military terms, everyone's working off the same op order. Congress becomes a force multiplier instead of a brake. The risk, of course, is overreach. Moving so fast you don't see second and third order effects until they bite you.
Right, and in that scenario, checks and balances rely much more on courts, state governments, and internal dissent. So politically, midterms decide whether Congress is a counterweight or an amplifier for Trump's second-term agenda.
All right, E and S, economic and social. Under Democratic control, you'd probably see more skepticism about sweeping tariffs, more push for social spending, and tighter regulations on things like climate and labor. That can give workers and unions a bit more cover, but businesses complain they're buried in rules.
And socially, that can fuel culture war backlash. Conservative media and a lot of rural communities read those moves as coastal elites micromanaging their lives. That narrative is powerful. People feel talked down to, and that hardens polarization.
On the Republican side, especially with Trump, you're talking America First industrial policy, tariffs, pressure on allies over trade, incentives to reshore some production, and more willingness to cut domestic programs to fund other priorities. Some sectors win, others eat the cost. Socially, the lines get sharper. Where you live and how you identify starts to line up with whether you're a winner or loser under that model.
And communities without much financial cushion, low-income families, people relying heavily on social programs, undocumented workers, they feel any shock first. Whether the pressure comes from higher prices due to tariffs or from cuts on the safety net side, the impact is immediate at the household level.
Now T-E-L, technological, environmental, legal. Democratic midterm win, you probably get more appetite to regulate AI and big tech, privacy rules, concerns about algorithmic bias, maybe limits on certain kinds of surveillance, plus a stronger push on climate, clean energy incentives, tougher environmental protections, more ambitious emissions targets.
Legally, that Congress can act as a counterweight, fund and oversight efforts, writing tighter laws to limit broad executive moves they don't like, and backing litigation against orders they see as overreach. That doesn't stop every action, but it complicates unilateral decision-making from the White House.
Republican win is the mirror image. You'd expect deregulation pushes, less red tape for tech and industry, more space for fossil fuel projects, rollbacks of certain environmental rules. And on the legal side, a focus on confirming more conservative judges and writing laws that give the executive more leeway on immigration and national security, plus a more traditional stance on gender and family issues.
Which means, in practice, that the legal environment around things like asylum claims, protest activity, surveillance tools, and recognition of gender identity could shift depending on which parties draft in the statutes and steering confirmations. For a lot of people, those aren't abstract debates. They define what rights they can actually exercise.
So you end up with two PESTEL worlds, one where Congress is trying to contain and shape a Trump second term, and one where Congress is helping him accelerate it. Same global threats, same economy, but very different operating rules. Next up, we map what each side can really do with the hand they're dealt.
Let's move into SWOT. First matrix, Democratic midterm win under a Trump presidency. Strengths first. The big one is restored oversight. Committees can subpoena, hold hearings, and demand documents. They also control a lot of the budget levers, so they can attach conditions to funding for things like border operations or certain policing programs.
Yeah, and they've built a coalition that includes a lot of educated suburban voters who are allergic to constant chaos. If Democrats win midterms in that environment, it signals those folks still want to check on Trump, not a blank check. That's political strength heading into the next cycle.
Weaknesses, though. That coalition is wide and internally divided. Progressives, centrists, people who don't agree on much beyond slow this president down. That makes it hard to move from blocking to building, and the White House will frame them as pure obstruction, which can land with some independence.
Plus the risk of overplaying the hand. If every committee hearing looks like a show trial, regular folks tune out. That feeds the idea that institutions are just partisan weapons, not neutral referees. That's bad for trust inside the country, and for how allies view our system.
On the opportunity side, Democrats could use that oversight power to highlight real abuses on surveillance, worker safety, civil rights, and tie it to concrete reforms. Done right, that refreshes their brand as defenders of rule of law, not just anti-Trump actors.
But threat-wise, if they fail to deliver material protection, if people don't feel safer, more secure, or more prosperous, you could see more anger on the streets. Protests, feeling that even with a check in Congress, nothing big actually changes. That's how you get a legitimacy crisis creeping in.
And inside the national security system, a Democratic Congress scrutinizing military or homeland security orders, say large-scale border deployments, creates delicate civil-military dynamics. It can reinforce lawful norms, but it can also be framed as undercutting the commander-in-chief. Officers in the middle have to navigate that carefully.
All right, second matrix. Republican midterm win with Trump in the big seat. Strengths are pretty straightforward. Policy coherence. Same broad playbook between the Hill and the White House. Law and order, nationalism, America first. That lets them move fast on nominations, budgets, and messaging.
Speed and unity are powerful. They can lock in long-term changes, judicial appointments, regulatory rollbacks, trade posture that outlast a single term. And the messaging is simple and emotionally resonant for a lot of people who feel ignored by elites.
But that unity can be a weakness too. If the movement is over-centralized around Trump as a person, any scandal, legal setback, or sudden pivot hits the whole structure. There's not a lot of redundancy in the system when one man is the brand.
They also risk pushing moderates and some traditional allies away. Aggressive nationalist policies combined with weaker oversight can make partners question U.S. predictability. That matters in alliance networks, from Europe to the Pacific, where continuity is part of deterrence.
And some base-friendly moves, hardline immigration steps, tougher protest policing, can crank up domestic tension. From a security angle, that's more flashpoints, more demonstrations, more chances for confrontation between citizens in the state.
In terms of opportunities, Republicans could use unified control to build a durable coalition of working class voters, small business owners, and cultural conservatives who feel the system finally responds to them. They can also set long-term doctrine on things like trade and border management.
The threat is that if other communities, immigrants, racial and religious minorities, LGBTQ people, feel written off as collateral damage, politics hardens into zero-sum street battles instead of bargaining inside institutions. That's destabilizing, and once that genie is out, it's tough to put back.
Zooming out, both outcomes shape conditions for 2028. A Democratic midterm win could signal fatigue with non-stop crisis and open space for new leadership lanes inside both parties. A Republican win could cement populist nationalism as the dominant right-of-center model, forcing Democrats to adjust their coalition or risk fracturing.
They also send a signal abroad. Is U.S. power constrained by internal checks, or streamlined and more willing to act quickly? Allies, adversaries, and even protesters in other countries all read that signal. And inside our own system, civil-military relations and protest dynamics will track closely with which path we choose.
And for people who don't sit in think tanks, families on tight budgets, migrants in the system, communities facing discrimination, the difference between those paths can feel like the difference between safety and precarity. So, wherever you land politically, midterms are not background noise.
Yeah, bottom line, this ain't a drill, folks. Midterms are live fire. You sit out, you still get hit by the blast radius of whatever policy comes down range. So get spun up, get informed, then move to the objective, vote.
We'll keep breaking this down in future episodes, issue by issue. Borders, tech, use of force overseas. For now, treat this as your strategic overview of the midterm battle space.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Stay curious, stay compassionate, and stay engaged.
Copy that. Watch your sector, take care of your neighbors. Duke out.
Sentinel signing off. Keep your heads on a swivel and your minds open.
And I'm Chukwuka. God bless you. God bless America. We'll pick this up next time. Take care.